welcome to today's episode of Heard and Seen Around. I am Rajesh Karipurath. This is my take on macroeconomic and geoeconomic data points which I find interesting. I hope you enjoy watching it as much as I enjoyed curating it. Cheers.
Life comes at you fast, mostly in the form of emails you forgot to reply to. I'm not avoiding problems, I'm simply allowing them to mature into opportunities for future panic. The office printer is the only machine that can sense fear and deadlines. Inflation means your money still exists, just in smaller, more fragile emotional units. We say the market is nervous, as though it's a shy teenager and not a $1 trillion mood swing.
Japan is quietly back on top as the world's biggest holder of US treasuries, while China is slowly ghosting Uncle Sam, sliding from above $1.2 trillion to under $800 billion, like a trader exiting a bad position without making eye contact. Meanwhile, the UK plus France line looks like someone discovered leverage and then discovered consequences. Ireland, Belgium, Luxembourg, they've basically become the Delaware of global bond parking, mysteriously booming with no explanation anyone believes. And Russia, well, their line leaves the chart faster than your weekend savings after a Friday night out. Emerging markets have spent the last 30 years during their best impression of that friend who always promises that they are turning their life around and then immediately trips on the next crisis. The tequila crisis, the Asia crisis, the Russia default, Lehman, Greek drama, the Chinese devaluation, COVID, etc. EM has hit every pothole on the economic highway and still ended up roughly where the EAFE is. Talk about running hard just to stay in place. By the way, EAFE stands for Europe, Australasia and the Far East. So this chart basically says EM is equal to high energy, low returns. EAFE is equal to low energy, similar returns. The festive season was supposed to bring a demand boom. But the data does not look too great. SUV growth has slowed sharply and passenger cars are basically idling in neutral. Even the perennial hero, festive buying, seems to have taken a long weekend. On the other hand, GST collections are already losing steam before the GST cut kicks in. FY26's line drops faster than patience on a Monday morning traffic jam. In short, the economic rebound is happening, yes, but it's more second gear uphill than turbocharged recovery. Or, as Yogi Berra would have said, the future ain't what it used to be. Europe's $31 trillion economy looks like a giant financial pie, and Western Europe is still hogging the biggest slice, with Germany alone serving up a $5.3 trillion comeback after years of industrial indigestion. Northern Europe punches above its weight. The UK is doing its best I am relevant impression, and Southern Europe, well, Italy and Spain are holding the fort with admirable optimism. Eastern Europe is growing, but Russia's $2.5 trillion economy feels like a subplot in a darker movie. Overall, Europe in 2026 is less one unified engine and more four neighborhoods sharing a generator. India's education curve looks like a classic growth chart, rural areas improving steadily and urban areas sprinting ahead. Rural illiteracy has crashed from 2/3 to 1/3, but higher education is still rare. There's 1 in 15 making it to a degree. Urban India, meanwhile, has gone from some schooling to 1 in 4 adults with higher education in just 3 decades. And the real plot twist? Young rural Indians are closing the gap fast. Only 2% of older rural adults had higher education, and today it's 16% in their 20s. That's not a gap. That's a generational upgrade. India's fuel consumption is losing momentum, up just 1.2% this year versus nearly 2.8% last year. The big story? Diesel, which makes up almost 40% of all fuel use and grew only 2.5%. That's basically the economy saying, I'm moving, but just not in a hurry. Across the board, LPG demand held steady, ATF barely took off, and naphtha and bitumen hit the decline lane. Petrol growth has also cooled, hinting at softer mobility and maybe a bit more EV creep than we think. In short, India isn't running out of energy, it's simply shifting how it uses it. India's R&D story is basically a high-stakes drama with no climax. Nifty 100 firms still spend under 1% of revenues on research, less than what some global peers spend on office snacks. Defense and pharma are carrying the entire scoreboard, while most other sectors are barely stretching. Even within PSUs, a few defense giants dominate the R&D bill, and when it comes to patents, a handful of companies do all the heavy lifting while everyone else politely observes. The global comparison is the real sting. India's R&D share trails South Korea, Japan, the US, and even Germany by a mile and a half. As Einstein once joked, we cannot solve problems with the same thinking we used when we created them. This chart makes one thing obvious. The world's financial safety net is basically an Asia-led group project. China alone sits on a mountain of $3.5 trillion, Japan guards another $1.2 trillion, and India adds a solid $643 billion. And together, that's more than half of global reserves sitting in just 3 walls. The Europe and the US look respectable, sure, but compared to Asia's cash, they're playing the light version of financial firepower.